Okay. So, I mean, once I kick off officially at 12, then I mean everyone can turn on their videos and then yes, we get started. But for now, yes, you can just still keep your videos and audios off. All right. Okay. I can see that there are already a number of people joining. Thank you all for joining and for joining so early. So we'll just wait another 3 minutes as more people join, then we'll kick off at exactly 12. All right, so we can get started. It's 12 already on my end. So welcome everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for joining Tech Hive Advisory's Hive Pulse Point today, the July edition. I can already see a number of people on the call. Thank you for being so early. If you have a friend who's meant to be joining this webinar as well, please send them a message and let them know that we've started. Okay, so welcome, welcome, welcome. And a big welcome as well to our speakers. We have brought the experts to the room to be talking to us today about how to operationalize AI governance frameworks. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Loretta Onwebuze. I work as a data protection analyst here at Tech Hive Advisory, and I also work across the other teams within Tech Hive Advisory, from cybersecurity to regulatory intelligence and AI governance. So yeah, and every month we host a Hive Pulse Point. So it's a monthly webinar series where we look at some contemporary topics around law, business, technology, and policy. And then we bring experts to come and have a conversation with us and, share insights and really help us break it down and understand things. So for the July edition, we'll be looking at from policy to practice, operationalizing AI governance frameworks. And I mean, a lot of us on the call have been hearing a lot about AI governance, and how organizations are now trying to integrate AI into their operations. Every sector, every country, everyone is just trying to understand how do we properly, legally, and ethically, deploy AI into our operations. So, I mean, that's just like the broad summary of what we'll be looking at today. So I will now let the speakers quickly introduce themselves. So in no particular order, just as I see them on my screen. We can start with Temitayo Ogumokun. So you can go ahead and unmute now and just introduce yourself to the audience. We already shared all the speaker bios, but just to talk about yourself a bit and what you do in like 1-2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Loretta. Hi, everyone. My name is Tayo. Please call me Tayo. Everyone calls me Tayo. I'm a privacy lawyer. I've been doing law for a few years, privacy as well. I am currently based in the Netherlands. I work from Amsterdam, but I've also worked in a few other places doing law, consulting, and, working in-house. Now, my primary focus is privacy, but I also do AI governance and information security. Recently, over the past, I would say, couple of months, I'm fully focused on privacy and AI governance in the HR context. It's a pleasure to join this wonderful panel. I've been working with Hive for a few years from inception, actually, and it's always nice to come back and share insights on in opportunities like this and to also discuss with fellow experts in the industry. So I look forward to enjoying the next few minutes, or is it an hour and a half, to properly address the questions that will come here. Thanks again, Loretta.
Thank you, Tayo. Thank you so much. All right, so the next person on my screen is Ikran Abdurrahman. So please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Ikran Abdurrahman. I am currently the founder and principal consultant at Deeper Consultancy, which mostly focuses on data protection and AI governance. So helping organizations understand what responsible AI adoption looks like and how to implement this, and also looking at data protection compliance. I've also been a lawyer for several years now. My main focus at the beginning was on corporate law, but I extended into data protection and policy. I've also worked previously on certain AI programs from a policy perspective. So working with UNESCO, managing the Global AI and Rule of Law project, which was mostly focused on capacity building on AI. And AI, I guess, risks and opportunities for judges specifically. And yes, I am very happy to be here and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Ikran. It's great to have you here as well. Okay, so the next person on my screen is Ubongabasi Obot. So please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Loretta. Hi, everyone. My name is Ubongabasi. Like Tayo, I have a short name. You can call me Yubi. Feel free to call me Yubi. So I currently work as Data Protection Officer for Xenia Technology Solutions. And I cover Canada and Ireland. Xenia is in like about 5 continents. Also rounding up my PhD in AI governance at the University of Surrey. But today I'm currently speaking to you from Canada, and it's about 5 a.m. where I am. Yeah, so I agreed to do this when Tech Hive called me. We've been friends for a while, but I think I agreed in my sleep. Like, he called me in my sleep, like Ridwan called me, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can do this. But I'm really pleased to be here and happy to share insights. I got into AI governance through my PhD, but I have been working in data protection, and I'm a lawyer. Been a lawyer for about 12 years. Qualified in Nigeria and getting qualified in Canada too. Well, I'm just happy to be here. So I'm practicing, basically, I'm theoretically doing a PhD in AI governance, and I have the opportunity to practice it at work. So it's really nice, right? I'm bringing things together, and I cannot wait to hear everyone and share insights in this webinar. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Yubi. Oh my God, 5 a.m. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so now we have Victor Famubodi. You can go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right, thank you very much, Loretta. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, my name is Victor Famubodi, and I'm simply just called Victor. I'll say I work at the intersection of technology and policy, and specifically just focused around digital governance, with a lot of we did a lot of focus on AI governance. Been doing it for quite some time. helped with helping, just basically government, private sector organizations, just thinking around how best they can position when it comes to AI policy and governance. And for me, it's just I'm here to learn from also the co-panelists and just discussing on key problems around the AI governance, which is very critical to what we're doing today when it comes to AI. So it's a pleasure, and I look forward to having a very productive conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so I'll just go straight into the question and answer. So the first question, I'm actually directing it at UB, but I would also like to hear Tayo's thoughts as well. We have a diverse audience on this call. We have students, we have people who are just interacting with AI governance for the first time. They're just hearing about it. We have people who are just curious to know what it's about. We have people who work in policy, and we also have people on the call who work in organizations that have begun to deploy AI into their operations, and they want to understand, why is it important? What should they be paying attention to? So the first question for UB is to give us like an overview of AI governance, particularly AI governance frameworks. Why is it important? Why should organizations be paying attention to it? And, what are the ways that they can sort of bring these high-level frameworks and policies into something that would be easy to use in their organization? So yes, UB, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think a good starting point about AI governance it's basically how we think about your normal day-to-day life, right? I like to situate myself in AI governance, and that way you just be able to understand why it's important. Think about everything you're currently using in your house as part of your day-to-day life. Your phones, your fridge. Basically, your fridge can determine what's in it, collect a lot of data. Your robot that cleans your house, if you have one. Think about your scheduling and your health at work, and robots that can actually check you out to determine exactly what's going on with you. Think about all of that and situate yourself in it, because that's part of it. That's why we actually need AI governance. Technology is developing at a pace that is faster than law, and law is playing catch up, right? And this is why these things are important. Why we need to think about AI governance. It is why we need to think about AI ethics, because it affects all of us. Like, you cannot single yourself out in this society right now, because the way life is going, it touches you whether you like it or not. Now, as it has to do with an overview of like global AI policies, I'd like to always start with the EU AI Act, right? Because it is the first major regulatory framework on AI. And I always like the EU, even as it has to do with data protection, because it always like has like the highest standards. So if you're working from the EU, right, you can really never go down. That's how I like to think about it. So if you start from there, and then you're able to situate yourself in different policies, depending on which country, which continent that you're thinking of. It's a lot, right? So you're thinking about the EU Act, you're thinking about principles like the OECD principles. If you're in Canada, you're thinking about Canada's Directive on Automated Decision Making. I think Nigeria has a national AI strategy draft. Everyone basically has something. I think the White House actually just brought out guidance 2 days ago on AI and stuff like that. And so when you start to think about too many things, sometimes you wake up and you're thinking, okay, where do I start? How do I catch up? What do I have to read every day to catch up? Like, it is really, it's something that bothers you. I'd like to say situate yourself in the country that you are, start from where you are, like I said, or start from the highest apex. So maybe you can use the EU AI Act as guidance, depending on what you do. I will speak from the perspective of insurance technology, which I currently work, and the perspective of the academia, which I currently study, right? So as it has to do with the universities, we're thinking about things like in ethics review boards, as it has to do with whatever projects you're working on, whatever you're developing. That's like very important. You're thinking about integrating AI governance into curriculums, different curriculums. That way researchers would know to look out for AI ethics and that kind of borderline kind of things. You're thinking about things like maybe dedicating ethics fellows, roles to PhD applicants and so and so. Now, as it has to do with insurance technology, especially digital insurance, you're thinking about like an AI governance office, which I don't think you should have it on its own. I believe that you should embed it in the legal compliance teams, the risk teams. You should have it in there. As a matter of fact, the way I got into AI governance at work, it wasn't given to me like, oh, you have to start doing AI governance now. I was working on privacy, and then I started out picking out AI, AI governance things and stuff like that. So think about it in this way that you have. I currently work at the cross-functional position of having to work with like product teams, the engineering teams, the legal teams, compliance teams, the risk team, right? And you have engineers telling you that they want to add new features to your product. So applications, right? And you're saying, oh, wow, this has to do with AI. We have to think about this in this way. And you begin to flag the different things that might be a problem. You cannot use this to solely make a consumer decision without a human supervising it. You cannot use this without thinking about bias and all of that. And everybody comes back to you and say, oh, so what can we now do to be able to move forward with this? Basically, I believe that the first thing that I did for me that worked was looking at the different policies and then turning them into a little playbook for my company. So people have something to refer to, like they have to go to that. And the next thing I did was actually putting together a bit of training and a skills metrics and like training for the company. That also really worked. And then I started to champion like an ethics network in my company as it has to do with AI governance. If you see something, let me know about it. Don't just go out there and get a product. Let me assess it. And I think the biggest one was adding the AI impact assessment questionnaires to our contract management software with some particular questions. So if you answer those questions as a yes, basically you have to fill out an AI impact assessment. And then I think everyone is going liking it these days, but because change is not smooth. So people will try to resist it. Why do we have to do all of those and all of those? But of course, if you make them serious, then they're going to do it. So basically, you just answer some questions when you're filling out, like, I don't know what people use, but for example, we use Ironclad to manage our contracts. And if you're filling out like, will this product have an AI feature? And you say yes, you have to do an AI, fill out an AI impact assessment for me, right? I think I would like Temi Taya, right, to continue from here. Yes.
All right. Taya, over to you if you'd also like to share some thoughts.
Taya, not Timmy, please. I'm very intentional about that bit. But yes, thank you very much. That was a comprehensive response, and I can draw insights, lots of insights from that. But you know what? I'll try to simplify it as much as I can, right? I see AI governance frameworks as that arrangement or that process with which you manage how you engage, how you create, how you design, how you test, how you manage, how you improve AI systems within your organization. So I'm going to speak from a purely organizational perspective, not academia or research or policy, right? So it's that coordinated approach as to how you manage things, especially concerning AI. A single uniform arrangement or process. That is what I would call an AI governance framework. And it draws from several approaches, right? You can have something that is based on principles, like the OECD principles that you mentioned, ensure that your AI governance framework is it's transparent, or your AI systems are transparent, they're explainable, they're robust, you're embedding security and privacy. But also recently, we're seeing that some of these frameworks are based on rules or laws, like the EU AI Act, right? So the provisions of the EU AI Act are mandatory. You don't exactly have a leeway. You have to comply. It's just like the GDPR. So it can be principles based. It can be rule based. There are a couple of other approaches, like like sectoral approaches and whatnot. But those are the two predominant basis for the recent governance frameworks that we have. So on operationalizing these frameworks within organizations or making them very actionable, very practical, there are a couple of recommendations, real recommendations that we are adopting. When I say we, I mean my team, myself, the team that I work with, right? The very first thing that we did at the onset of all of this, wave of regulations on AI, the very first thing that we did was that we defined and set a very clear vision, a list of goals for our AI approach. So the way I did that was that I approached all of the team leads within my function, right, and said, hey, you know what? Why don't you guys look inward, look at all of your use cases and see how we can use AI to optimize the things that you're doing correctly. So we had a conversation with them, and they did. They took some time. They came back with the feedback. We looked at all of the feedback. We curated them, and then we created them into one single process or flow that inspired our vision. So we drew up a vision based on the feedback, and then we set clear and measurable objectives based on this. So as the very first course of action, you need to define your AI governance vision. That this is what you're looking to do. These are the things that you're looking to achieve, and these are the principles that you will be applying. Another step that we took, which you'll be also referred to, is a lot of documentation. Not a lot, but very clear documentation, like policy. So we started with having an AI governance policy at a very high level. So it has certain set of requirements that every AI stakeholder has to reference. You cannot do things haphazardly. You cannot do things on your own. You need to have something clear that you can refer to. We're also leveraging templates a lot. So documentation, very important. Another point would be roles and responsibilities. So we're using a shared accountability model in the sense that everyone is responsible holistically. But at the same time, AI is a cross-functional, it needs a cross-functional approach. You need to have people from legal, from IT, from the business, from products, and all of that to contribute to your governance framework. But at the same time, you need to clearly assign roles and responsibilities to each of them. Everyone must know what they're doing. And this is for accountability purposes. In case there's a gap, you know who or what team to approach. And last but not least, I would say tooling. You mentioned that too. It's important that if you want to operationalize AI governance frameworks, I would encourage tooling, especially for big organizations. The beautiful news is that there are lots of AI governance platforms that are flooding the market. IBM Watson Scale is one very good example. I use that, right? Databricks, Domo, MS Azure, which is a cloud computing platform, is also enabling certain AI governance tools within the platform itself. So you can help with stuff like bias detection, transparency, and whatnot. So if you can leverage tooling, I would always recommend it. At the final note, culture is important. Just like a lot of employees in organizations are now very conversant with the need for privacy. Your employees, your AI stakeholders should also be conscious of the need for awareness of AI implications, the potential harms of AI, the benefits and disadvantages. They need to have it ringing at the top of their mind. That culture has to be pervasive. So foster that culture within the organization as soon as possible. I will leave things here because I know that there's still lots to talk about, but yes, those few items would be my recommendation on operationalization.
Yes, thank you so much. Those, in fact, yourself and UB have done justice to that question. But I also want to hear from Victor, especially looking at it from an African perspective, because I know that Victor has done a lot of work with startup founders in Africa, across Africa, especially those that are building with AI. So I don't know if Victor can speak to some of the challenges that they've had rather, because I know that sometimes the legal policy people are speaking one language, but the technical people, those that are actually building with AI, are speaking another language. So Victor, what does AI governance operationalization look like for African startup founders that are building with AI?
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I mean, it's just listening in from UB and Time. It's just been quite, enriching. I would say, let me first start with the challenges, especially working with different kinds of startup founders and just large organizations within the African continent. I'll say one of the biggest challenges is the fact that a lot of these organizations have a misplaced priority. And no offense, the reason is because when we are looking at AI, it's not just it's an artifact, right? It's a technology. it still needs something to live by. So what I mean by this is, if you're an organization, you still need to do the right things within the organization to be able to ensure that you are getting the benefits from AI. AI is specifically very bullish on things like ensuring that you have a well-defined problem. You can't start a business, especially when you're looking at it from a business perspective. You need to understand what the business problem, this AI solution that you're looking to get, what is planning to solve. So a lot of times the challenge is that everybody wants to get into the AI space, but without understanding these basics. A good example would be if I'm having to talk to founders. I know during the growth of foundational models like the likes of ChatGPT and others, when it came into serious utilization from 2022 upward, you can sense everybody wants to play in that field. But you now ask key questions from this organization. Where exactly do you want to play? Are you playing within the upstream model development space, like the regular labs like OpenAI, Anthropic, and others? Or do you want to play at the application layer, which is basically where almost every company wants to play? So they are either procuring AI solutions or they are distilling base models or model weights that then they can use to develop different kinds of applications, like whether you are developing a product focused on collecting data, or you are using a product that's going to interface with consumers. So for me personally, I've seen those challenges with the fact that they don't even know where they want to play. They're just following the trend without understanding the basics around how this technology really operates. And as what Tayo said, is highly cross-functional, meaning that it's interdisciplinary. You need to be able to recognize the roles of everybody within that ecosystem. And for a lot of founders or a lot of leaders within the startup scene, everybody just wants to get into it without having the clear responsibilities that are set out for how this technology is going to function, either from the point of, let's say you are in the development space like I mentioned, or you're just deploying the solutions for the larger market for people to be able to onboard and then use your technology, or you are even at the downstream layer where you just basically use this system and you are using it to create different kind of experiences for your customers. So for me, I see those challenges, which is one that has to do with not clear definition about the problem, because basically it's a business problem that you are trying to fix. Secondly, it's about the role definition, who is responsible for what, how clearly do you even understand how this system, in terms of the life cycle, what is needed from the development stage to whether deployment to testing to auditing to user redress, whichever cycle that this falls under. Who are those that are going to be responsible? And I'll say lastly, it's always great to lastly on this question, it's always great to have what's the name? It's always great to have like you trying to as much as possible integrate with what the global ecosystem is talking about. But a lot of times, most of these standards, right, when it comes to those AI principles, those laws, those policies, and the likes, they are very good. But because of the local context in which they are going to be used, there's that disparity, right? There's that imbalance because a lot of times you need to contextualize based on the environment, which means you need to understand the organization's maturity to even be able to adopt and adapt the standards. And I've seen cases where people have gotten back to me, have concerns about the fact that these standards are totally way off, what they would like to, adopt within the African, context. So I'll just keep it at those three levels. I hope I've been able to, do a bit of justice to, some of the real concerns from a startup side.
Yes, absolutely you have. And I still have a question that I'm going to come back to you on, but I just want to quickly go back to Tayo. There's a question. So now looking at AI governance and how it's beginning to gain wave, we've had the time where information security compliance was like the big deal, and then data protection compliance. Now organizations are also having to look at AI governance and how to integrate AI, and how to adopt some of these frameworks. So how can organizations foster that cross-functional collaboration among all the different, business units, from sales to legal to the technical and IT side of operations? How can organizations manage that cross-functional bit to ensure a holistic approach to AI governance? And bearing in mind that teams have had to go through series of trainings, understanding how to ensure data security, how to ensure data protection, now AI governance, and how to ethically, legally, safely use AI. I mean, won't this cause some kind of compliance fatigue? And how can organizations deal with that?
Very well. So I think I should start by saying, and this is something that's been said a few times already, that the concept of AI is a socio-technical phenomenon with economic implications. So what that means is that it influences human behavior and is influenced by human behavior, and all of that interaction has economic implications, right? So it's not something that one team or one domain can fully govern. You must get input from different domains that are diverse, not just different, but very diverse across the broad range of industries. So again, at the baseline, cross-functional collaboration is important, but there are different ways that you can foster this. And I think number one would be a unified vision, right? It's important that you have a clear and overarching governance strategy that all the teams that you're working with, all the teams that are stakeholders in your AI governance approach understand and buy into. So in building that vision, like I said earlier, you need to get input from everyone. That was what I did. We had to, draw input from talent acquisition. Again, this is within the people function, for example, within HR, talent acquisition, from leadership, from recruitment, from this, from that, right? Get input, and based on the input, create something, a unified vision that everyone sees, everyone understands, and everyone buys into. Apart from that, right, I think it's important to create what I would call working groups, cross-functional working groups. So you're creating committees, you're creating groups that comprise different representatives from these domains, from legal, from technical, and they're owning stuff. They're owning components of the AI lifecycle, right? So working groups that are periodically meeting, that are collaborating and coming up with initiatives in such a way that no one is left behind. No one is playing catch up when it comes to initiatives. I would say it's also important that you integrate your frameworks. So a lot of organizations have existing frameworks on privacy, on security, on business continuity, on quality. For example, they have existing governance frameworks for this. If you're creating an AI governance framework, it's important that you draw from what exists. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Don't stress yourself, right? Draw insights from what you're using, the controls that you're applying to govern this or to manage this governance framework. So you can apply the same controls. The only thing you need to do is to expand whatever domains in those controls or in those frameworks to include new, AI risk or new AI considerations. So everything should be managed under one holistic umbrella, such a way that you're not isolating your AI governance framework. And then communication. Communication is very important. So there must be open communication channels, right? There must be open information flows. Nobody's keeping information. Legal is not getting updates on whatever it is that you're working on at the deployment stage. You must be involving compliance from the ideation stage when you're still even thinking of maybe training a foundation model or building an AI system on a foundation model. You need to immediately loop in compliance. So you're not telling them. It's like responsible AI by design, just like privacy by design, that you have to do from scratch. In this sense, AI governance, you're thinking of AI governance from the ideation stage. So communication, collaboration, all of this extremely important. Now, I would say that a vital thing, this should even be the first, but I put it last for an important reason, is that to foster that cross-functional collaboration, you need a central hub or an AI governance lead. It's important. It could be a primary stakeholder or a primary team that that, hey, you're looking to for direction on the course of AI governance. You know that they're responsible for steering, something like a steer crew. That makes sense. They're steering the costs, they are linking different teams together. So everyone is not working in isolation, because it's important to, or it's very easy if there's no central coordination, it's very easy for one team to be left behind, especially if you're not that relevant in a technical perspective, from a technical perspective. The legal teams are not, they don't do today design, for example, so they can easily left behind. But if there's a central figure or a central governance lead that is carrying everyone along, that is planning meetings, coordinating information flows, in that sense, that team can be responsible for that alignment. This alignment is fundamental. If there is no alignment, the likelihood that your AI governance framework will not be sufficient for whatever it is that you're building or you're deploying is very high. So I would say that bearing those in mind, a unified vision, cross-functional working groups, integrating your existing processes and bringing AI governance into the fold, information flows, and I would say an AI governance lead. Those are very vital approaches that you can take to foster a sense of collaboration among different teams when it comes to AI deployments.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That question was really to understand how to get buy-in from all of these things, and you did justice to it, mentioning the working groups, having a unified vision, having someone who can also lead that conversation, so that the legal team isn't feeling overwhelmed or the technical team isn't feeling like, oh, they brought another task on our table. Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so I'll move to Ikran now. Thinking about AI impact assessments, thinking about algorithmic audits. Most of the existing AI governance frameworks require some level of risk assessment, some level of monitoring, and your work is really to help organizations, find ways to implement some of the requirements of these frameworks. So what does internal implementation of AI governance look like for African organizations now? Especially looking at all of these assessments that they have to do, the regular monitoring that they have to do when they deploy AI internally, and how does this increase operational cost? Are there other cost-effective ways for African organizations to adopt some of these frameworks?
Thank you so much. I think it was really great to listen to everybody, the very insightful contributions. I think I'll start by, first of all, emphasizing what Ty said about the importance of cross-functional collaboration. So in everything that actually will say, there's a lot of contribution from not only legal, compliance and risk, but also IT teams and operational teams. And so when it comes to impact assessment, I think the first thing that I would say is that there's a very big importance in leveraging what already exists, right? So as you've mentioned, there's a lot of data protection that is involved. And so that also extends into AI governance. So I think the first thing would be to try and leverage what already exists. And before, as you're going to impact assessment, I think the first thing would actually be to look at what are, like mapping out what are the AI uses in your organization. Are you adopting AI from external parties? Are you actually developing AI systems? So it's important to ascertain how these AI systems are already even being used or developed in your organization. And from there, then you're able to map out what are some of the existing compliance needs, right? So that's now where you go to data protection. For instance, you find that there are already some existing regulations when it comes to specific use. In health, for example, or finance, it's important to look at. And specifically looking at impact assessment, these are the basis of monitoring AI systems and looking at whether they're being developed or used in ethical or legally compliant means. So I would say there are already a lot of existing risk assessment frameworks. So you'll find that in industry, there are some organizations that are developing AI by looking at the NIST risk management framework, for instance, or looking at ISO certifications. So these are standards that are developed by International Organization for Standardization that help to ascertain whether your AI systems are ethical. So there are a lot of them. There's some of them on risk management, there's on AI impact assessments. So as you mentioned, a lot of these system or certifications are also quite resource heavy. So that's also one of the difficulties that definitely presents itself. But going back to what is available in industry, you'll find that certain companies, especially big companies, if you look at Microsoft, they already have a risk management framework in place. So they have a tool that was developed in 2022. And these types of tools are able to guide you in actually having a basis from which to tailor certain frameworks for your own organization. So for instance, I think NIST AI risk management framework is something that is widely accepted and it's also used. Even I've spoken to several people in Kenya who are using this risk management framework. And basically it highlights various, it breaks down various things that you're supposed to consider in risk management. So I think if I was just to mention a few of them, it would be looking at what is, first of all, the AI system, what is the purpose of the AI system, is there human, and what type of human and stakeholder involvement is happening in this particular situation. So what are some of the roles of these people, for instance, AI actors, looking at AI literacy within the organization, and whether the AI system has human in the loop. So is there human involvement in the process? Are they able to override or modify such outcomes? So I think this is, when you look at specifically risk assessment, these are certain tools that are already available. But going back to mapping, I would say the starting point is always looking at what exists currently in our market. So you'll find that we look at local laws. So we'll mostly look at our data protection laws and sector-specific laws to identify how do these ethical principles, which are globally accepted, applicable in our own context. Another thing is, I would also point out that it's important, as you look at local laws, to also consider international or other laws from other regions. So for example, the EU AI Act, prima facie, you might not think that it applies to you, but perhaps the output of your AI system is going to be used in the EU region. So those are certain things that I would think would be important to consider. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Ikran. And so I will now go back to Victor, because when you were speaking about the challenges, especially for founders in Africa that are trying to build with AI or integrate AI into their operations, I was hoping he would mention something about the cost, because a lot of these startups might not have the budget to hire an AI expert, might not have the budget for some of these audits, or to do some full-blown integration of some of the AI governance frameworks that are existing. So what are some inexpensive ways that startups can still ensure compliance and ensure that they're building right, they're building legally, ethically, safely?
I would say first, when just thinking about the problem again, and looking at it from the cost perspective. So, like I mentioned earlier, one key thing is about defining the problem. When you effectively define the problem, then it's going to also have a way to impact the cost. Because all of these things that have been mentioned, when you look at them closely, a lot of times you'll see some sort of lean more to like large organizations being able to implement some of them. And then for startups, smaller organizations, they might a bit struggle. And that's where you bring the conversations around cost. So when you look at costing, a good example when you are building is a lot of developers will possibly leverage open source tools. Right. They can go on, for instance, Hugging Face. They have access to open source models, open source, training data, open source testing data, different kinds of open source materials, right, that you can find in a place like Hugging Face. And then you have those tools and you can sort of utilize them into the framework that you're trying to do. Now, for an AI governance perspective, it's quite different in the sense that AI governance tools, they exist, but some of them can be super, expensive. As mentioned earlier, there was the one around IBM, and there are some tools that you can easily have access to, right? And then they just help you. You can help you. It can help with integrating on those AI governance framework in terms of when you're operationalizing them. So think of a classic tool like what's the name? The severity arms matrix, right? Is a good example of a tool that you can use. It's available where it's basically rating whatever you've done in terms of your product based on the level of arms that is possible when you put it into deployment. Or even at the development stage, you can already examine the different features that can perpetuate certain kind of arms just using that matrix. A good example is the UDERIA, right, which specifically speaks to human rights. From a rights approach, if for instance you're trying to integrate an AI governance framework, from a rights approach, you can then adopt this kind of tool to help you understand what are the human rights implications that exist when you are using this, when you are building or deploying these tools. And then for automated tools, right, you have different kinds of tools that exist. Those are actually good tools that you can always leverage on, depending on where your cost appetite exists. So there's like Credo AI, for instance, and different kinds of AI governance tools that you can actually adopt and then implement based on what is available. However, the challenge with using tools also comes with the fact that because today we have too many de facto standards, and apologies that I have to use that. It says that you have the ISO, you have the NIST, you have every one of these standards. They are fantastic. But the problem is when you are trying to contextualize it with your local environment, then there's a gap, because some of those, some of those ideas in terms of those frameworks and those standards, they exist for a purpose. And then when you're considering that you want to be able to, purchase an AI tool, or you based on the fact maybe an AI governance tool, and based on the fact that it is open source, there is no clear standard that effectively manages the risks that come with when you use those AI governance tools. So who is the watchdog for the watchdog, right? That's where a whole lot of gap exists. So for a startup of that kind, that's why it's very important that you need to be able to have your organization rights. All of the things you be Ikra and Ty had mentioned, you have to be able to have those things in place. So a perfect example would be things like an SOP, so a standard operating procedure that you have in place. So when you have these tools like these AI governance tools, and then you're slapping it on these sort of procedures, you know clearly where the dangers lie, you know clearly where the gaps lie, and then you can effectively manage as you proceed. So in terms of costing, you are being able to now, access cheaper versions of what is needed in terms of this tooling and then the infrastructure. And infrastructure is another different beast on its own, right? Where you are considering, especially if you play within, the upstream model development side, which you have to consider huge compute, capacity that will be needed as from an infrastructure perspective, or energy and the likes. But maybe not go too deep into that. But from an application layer, you need to be able to understand where those cost implications lie, and your ability to, streamline your operations to ensure that it can effectively accommodate whatever AI governance tool or whatever AI tool that you be integrating into your process. So that's how I would say is like the best approach if you're considering managing the cost implication.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, very valid points. Okay, so now I'll go back to Ikran. And just to say to the audience listening, if you have any question for any of the speakers, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A, because right after we wrap up with the general question and answers, we'll be taking your questions. So most of these existing AI governance frameworks, as a lot of us have already said on the call, we have the EU AI Act, we have the NIST framework, and we also have some existing frameworks that we just try to draw from. So how usually organizations might reduce some of these things into an internal AI governance policy. So how can they design those internal AI governance policies in a way that it's agile, it's adaptable, and it can quickly evolve as AI is evolving? What are some of the things organizations should be, considering or paying attention to when designing their internal AI governance policies?
Thank you for that. I think I'm going to also repeat a bit of what I said before. So first of all, you have to be keeping aware of what are your existing compliance needs. So of the existing laws, what are some of the compliance needs that cross-cut when it comes to AI systems? So not only data protection, you can also look at intellectual property. You can look at some of the contractual considerations when it comes to AI use and AI adoption. And I think beyond that, there needs to be a constant and consistent monitoring of regulatory and legal developments. So not only the laws, but also look at emerging jurisprudence. I think, we're in the Commonwealth, so there's a lot of, precedents, which is important. So just to be aware of what are some of the jurisprudence that is emerging, generated in jurisdictions. So that also helps you to be aware of what's happening out there that may still be applicable to your organization, and to also be agile in that sense. As I mentioned before, it's still important to be aware of international standards. We are very aware of the GDPR and how it started and the Brussels effect. So I think similarly, it's good to be aware of what's happening when you look at the EU, for example, and to be aware that there's a potentially forthcoming second wave of Brussels effect, So it's good to just have a general understanding of what's happening in other jurisdictions. And another thing that I would say is go back to the point I think Tayo made on culture. So I think one major aspect of that is looking at prioritizing AI literacy in your organization. So it could be, in the form of trainings or workshops on what AI is generally, what are some of the risks, what are some of the use cases that are relevant in your particular operation, and how to use this ethically and responsibly. So this can also, basically show up in AI use policies within your organization. So to also have in place within your AI governance framework to have, I think, an AI use policy or acceptable use policy, as you'd like to call it, and just to also make sure that your employees are constantly aware and trained. Another thing would also basically echo what Yubi said about the organization being aware of AI governance, and whether it's through leadership or an AI governance focal point, or whether it's your data protection team that works together with other teams, such as IT, for instance, to be aware of what are some of these current AI needs, and to be champions in that sense. So then, at least in that sense, there's a common understanding across that, AI governance is important, and it needs to be, basically it helps with the wider literacy of AI and AI governance needs as an organization. So I think these are some of the main things that I would say would help in keeping the systems agile and adaptable.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Yes. Okay, so we already have some questions, and we'll just be wrapping up the general question and answer with this particular question on liability, and how organizations can assign liability and accountability internally. So what team would take responsibility for what? Let's assume an organization wants to deploy an AI tool, for instance. Would it be that every independent team would be responsible for whatever goes wrong, based on what they are handling internally? And generally, for the existing frameworks, what's the approach on liability and harms around AI. So I'm thinking Tayo can speak to this. I'm thinking Ubon can speak to this, and Ikran. I mean, anyone is free to just take a jab at the question before we then go into the audience Q&A.
Thank you very much. So when it comes to assigning liability, I think the primary approach would be to define very clear policies around that, right? In your policies, your AI governance policies, ensure that you're clearly defining roles and then you're assigning liabilities. But just to be clear, in the context of AI governance, when it comes to AI governance, you cannot have teams working in isolation. And in that sense, liability also cannot be in isolation. So the general approach that we see, the approach that I adopt, is something that I call a shared accountability model, in which people assign clear roles and responsibility, but holistically, the entire AI group of stakeholders and multifunctional group are responsible for everything. Because when you know what they say, a team is only as strong as its weakest link. So let's assume that everyone else is doing something right, but there's one particular stakeholder or one team that is doing something wrong. That team is only, your governance framework is as strong as that weak link. It means if everyone is doing maybe let's say 90%, someone is doing 10%, our AI governance framework is 10%. That's how it is. So shared accountability model is extremely important. Holistically, everyone is responsible. But when it comes to assigning liability or roles to, I think adopting something that is the equivalent of a role-based model is also, applicable for AI developers. They are responsible for, the technical aspects of development. They're responsible for fairness. For data scientists, they are responsible for integrity. For the legal and compliance teams, they're responsible for monitoring and tracking regulatory requirements, and also ensuring that you're at an org enterprise level, you're being compliant. The ethics team, they are responsible for conducting impact assessments and measuring and producing results or producing the output of this. So everyone has clear roles, but holistically, the whole stakeholder group, the multi-functional group is still responsible. What we do is that we also adopt certain frameworks to support internal liability and responsibility. I would say that for a lot of organizations, internally we look at AI governance frameworks like the NIST AI risk management framework. It has a very nice, I would say, set of rules that you can look at to help you, to guide you on how to assign roles and responsibilities. But also very importantly, and something that is my favorite, I would say, is the ISO 2001, which is the Artificial Intelligence Management Standard. Something that I'm quite familiar with. ISO standards are my thing, right? They have very clear guidelines around how you not only assign roles, but to also manage risks. And we also internally we leverage a RACI matrix, like who is responsible for what, who is accountable for what, who has been consulted or is to be consulted, and who is informed. So if you're implementing all of these mechanisms and frameworks, you can create a robust internal system for managing risk. You can clearly assign responsibilities, and holistically, you can foster a culture of accountability that aligns with ethical principles and also prepares the organization for evolving requirements around AI governance.
I would just like to jump in and continue from where Tayo stopped. I re-echo everything Tayo said, right? He's very right about that. I think part of the things that really interests me, right, as it has to do with accountability and liability, it really has to do, it ties to the AI impact assessment. So you see, for instance, that you might assess a product or a vendor that is being brought on, and you have spotted like the different risk, everything that could go wrong in your thinking, and a business or a risk owner, so probably head of a team, let's say, for example, it was IT that was trying to acquire it, goes ahead to say, okay, what can we do to remediate this risk? And you tell them what to do. Now, at that point where Tayo said sometimes it's role-based, is the fact that you can ensure that they're held responsible for those risks. They have become aware of it. You have told them what to do. You have told them how to remediate it. And of course, legal and compliance is helping with all of that, but that is in their own court. that ball is in their own courts to do. Because to be honest, I am not developing, you're the one developing it. So I've told you what to do. So it is your responsibility to ensure that you have developed it the way that I have said it. Now, the next thing would be setting very clear incident reporting structures. Incident management is a big thing as it has to do with AI governance. So, for example, if something goes wrong, do people in your organization know who to contact? That's very important. Do they know how to reach out to you, to talk to you about it? And sometimes people are just afraid to come up and say something. They're like, oh no, I don't want to be talking about those kind of things. So do you have like probably clear whistleblowing policies? It might really help you, right? If something really goes wrong and everyone's afraid to talk. But if they know that you have clear whistleblowing policies, nothing will blow over on them. They will tell you what went wrong, and they'll quickly tell you what went wrong. It's also very important to have this clear incident reporting, policies and pathways, because if something goes wrong and people don't tell you in time, it becomes worse as the day goes by, right? So people have to quickly know how to react and respond to you. Now, you also have, as a company, you need to have a liability escalation path. So let's say, for example, they contact legal. What does legal do, right? Apart from saying, oh, this is the law and that, this is that, this and that, this is that, does it involve some kind of reporting? Who do you have, like that compliance middleware that Tayo was talking about, that cross-functional middleware, where you have like monthly check-ins and things like that to be able to check in, like, can you schedule like an impromptu call and say, oh, something has gone wrong, everyone come together, let's work on this, right? I think having that too, and being very clear about that, is very useful. Overall, just being very explicit as it has to do with accountability is useful. And if leadership actually also put their weight behind what does compliance middleware are doing, I think that's really good too. Because sometimes it has to do with how the leadership reacts to things. That's how the employees will take it. So if leadership can show that they're really serious about AI governance, they're really serious about being accountable, and then liability, they're very strict on that, I think it just becomes all the better.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I don't know if Victor or Ekran would also like to chime in. If not, we have so many questions to answer from the audience. So would Victor or Ekran like to make any addition, or should I just go ahead with the audience Q&A? Okay, so I take it that I can go ahead. So someone is asking, how does AI governance for LLM and AI governance for AI agents, how does it differ? Is there a difference? So I think anyone can actually take a jab at this question.
So if I may.
All right.
Interesting question. So I would say when you're considering AI governance for LLMs and AI agents, right? They are not they don't completely differ, but there are unique governance requirements for LLMs and AI agents. So for LLMs, LLMs here, if for instance, within the upstream model side, right? So let's say you work for OpenAI or Anthropic, like any lab, and then you've developed something like a model. And this model, then you are then looking to release the model weights. So the model weights will be released to developers, right? That want to use those model weights, they will distill it further and then use it for different kinds of applications. Right. Now, the governance required for such model, while all of this we've spoken about the operationalization, is also important that things like model cards, right? The system cards. So the model card here is saying, hey, how does this model behave? How does it interact? You know, what are the limitations of this model? So you'll notice that a lot of when new models are released, by a lot of these labs, they'll release model cards to support it. So that when you read them, it's a form of scientific communication. When you read them, you then understand what the limitations are, and you don't have like a out of a pie in the sky understanding about what this LLM is capable of. So to address LLM now for AI agents, and to just think of it further from LLMs, right? So if you're working within the upstream model side, when you cascade it further, when you want to distill this model, you then have to think about things like KYC. So governance around the KYC standards, because when you want to distill this model, the lab or whichever organization that is releasing this model needs to be able to have a clear distillation, plan in terms of KYC. So knowing your customer and then knowing maybe KYC, KYB. So you need to have a clear understanding around that when you're considering governance. Now for AI agents, it's quite unique in the sense that AI agents are very heavy within the application layer. They've been in existence for quite some time. I mean, some might be familiar with agent-based modeling, even self-driving cars, right? They are like a high extension of AI agents, right? They've just been used in that particular domain, but now you now see them more mainstream because they're like RPAs, what people refer to RPA on steroids, so robotic process automation on steroids, right? But AI agents are quite unique in the sense that it now questions, it does a lot of questioning on autonomy, right? And this conversation on autonomy has been in existence for quite some time. So it's not completely different from your regular AI governance, because AI governance also questions things around autonomy. So you're having to think human in the loop, human on the loop, and possibly human out of the loop. So at every point in time, this particular agent is making a decision, right? What are the humans that are involved? And that's where what Tayo, UB, and Ikran have mentioned around the rules. Those things are still fundamental when you're looking at AI agents. So you want to be able to have you want to have a governance structure that understands the accountability implications and basically the responsibility that are required for every point in time an AI agent makes a decision that might be taken on your behalf. So that's a way to look at, AI agents specifically when you're looking at the specific governance implications on that. However, when you still go further into AI agents, right? I always like to use the self-driving cars domain as a form of reference. So when you look at autonomous vehicles today, you have 5 levels of autonomy. You have level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But I like to use level 3 autonomy, even though they will say they've achieved level 5 autonomy, but that's a discussion for another day. Right? But when you look at level 3 autonomy, there's what you call the handoff challenge. And the handoff challenge here is saying an autonomous vehicle is moving, but you have a human in the loop to be able to take over whenever the vehicle is making a wrong decision or is about to make a wrong decision. So you have to think of, and that challenge now spills into what you call is a biological concern when you talk about like neurological lag. For every human, I'm so sure even for the speakers, you've had like a 5-second distraction, right? So it's similar to AI agents too. And this is a challenge. So when you're thinking of governance, you have to think about autonomy, especially when you're thinking of AI agents, and then how that can, better be built upon to develop the right procedures, the right policies in place, and also, the right processes to ensure that those AI agents don't go off, off track. So that's how I would say governance for that.
Such an interesting angle to the conversation. Thank you, Quincy, for asking that question. Okay, I don't know if
I can just
yes.
make one very simple addition to that, right? So from a legislative governance perspective, and this is not from an operational, right? One of the reasons why the EU AI Act, the most comprehensive AI law in the world, is because it has the requirements applied to every form of AI, right? There's no real distinction. Well, there are some distinctions, but the foundational rules apply to everything. There's no, I would say, there are no there are exemptions that we're still interpreting. We're expecting a couple of guidelines to further operationalize the law, but it's very comprehensive. That's the idea. So it includes LLMs, it includes AI agents. We leverage LLM, by the way. And that is different from the approach in China, for example, because China has been making laws on AI for a while, but their laws are very sectoral. So they have laws relating to the deployment or the development of AI for finance, for healthcare, and in some instances, like for AI agent as well. So it's very sectoral. It's fragmented, not fragmented per se, but it's sectoral. It's not comprehensive. So from a legislative governance perspective, we see that difference. In the EU, there's a broad umbrella. I can always refer to some law for what I should do when I'm either developing or deploying an LLM, a large language model, or an AI agent, or any other form of AI. But in some jurisdictions, right, you have to go to the sector and look at what sectoral rules apply. And in some where we don't even have anything at all, for either LLMs or for AI agents, you need to apply the principles-based approach, like human in the loop or human focused or human-based values, transparency, robustness. So you can see the differences, right? EU comprehensive law covers everything. China and some regions, even like the US, sectoral. In some regions, no clear comprehensive or sectoral laws, but just principles. So that's the legislative approach, or that's the legislative difference, I would say, across regions.
Thank you for adding that angle. Okay, I think someone is waiting to speak.
I think just to add something also from a legal perspective, I think that specifically when you look at agentic AI, there is a much higher level of autonomy in the decisions. So it's very important to also consider this. I think going back to what Tai said about the different legislative approaches, but I think from an organizational perspective where there are lack of rules, it's possible to develop your own guidelines or your own internal guidances. So whether you decide to follow a principle-based approach. But I think when you specifically look at agentic AI, it's very important to keep in mind that due to the autonomous nature of agentic AI, it's important to have kind of more rigid or more robust kind of processes. So to specifically look at how is this system or how is this tool actually coming to the decisions, how to be able to have a comprehensive manual or records to show that this is how the decision was come to and this was the process. So of course, appreciating the black box phenomenon, but it's still important to have in place ways or processes to ensure that you're able to explain, given that human in the loop may not be as strong as it is in different kind of instances. And I think another layer would also be to look at, if you're looking at a risk-based approach, to also consider what is the function of this AI, agentic AI. So if this agent is doing, low-risk functions, perhaps, as opposed to high-risk functions, it's also important to keep that risk profile into account. Yeah, that's what I've.
Yes, thank you everyone for that. We still have 4 questions. So Betty is asking, does the panel think it's time for Africa to have regional AI governance frameworks? Although she says regional AI frameworks, but I believe she means regional AI governance frameworks. For example, ECOWAS, EAC, SADC, and Sahel nations. What do you think? Because, and just to also add to that question, I remember attending an event recently where, people were saying there's really no need to have an Africa-specific AI governance framework. There are already existing frameworks that we can leverage on here in Africa. But what do you think? I see Tayo has unmuted. Okay.
Yeah, so I was going to say that when it comes to governance frameworks, having hard rules on the continent may be a bit premature. And I say this because even in the EU, right, we have the EU AI Act, but major parts of the law are not even operational yet. For example, 80 to 90% of the law will go live next month in 1 week or so, August 2nd. that's when the rules for general purpose AI models go live. So for now, the only real operational part of that law is the restrictions on prohibited AI systems. And that says a lot, because even in the EU, right, we have a law, but it's not fully operational. And we're still expecting a lot of guidelines to operationalize the law. And before the law has even gone live, there are calls to amend certain parts of the law. And that says a lot. So if I would say a jurisdiction as advanced, as very legislation oriented as the EU is still struggling to formulate something that works, I think it might be a bit premature to have something or a rule-based approach when it comes to AI governance on the continent. We can continue to have initiatives that are existing, like the Continental AI Strategy for the AU, Africa Union Continental AI Strategy. We can have guidelines. There's a national AI strategy that came from the NCIR, National Council on AI and Robotics. That's the Nigerian context, by the way. Right, so we can continue to have these regional or national AI guidelines or white papers or strategies and whatnot. But when it comes to having clear and hard rules, I would say that we take a pause, at least for now. And again, our contexts are somewhat different. Our contexts are significantly different because we're still struggling with the basics when it comes to AI deployment. Power, for example, is something, data centers, water, and all of this, right? These are things that power the development and the maintenance of AI systems. And these are things that we've not even fully gotten right on the continent. So I would say that we even address some of these things and try to clearly identify the best use cases for AI on the continent before we start to make hard rules. So for now, let's maybe work with strategies, with white papers, with guidelines, but no hard rules for now.
And I'm going to just leaning towards, I mean, those that have seen some of my works and are close to me, they know anything legislation, I'm always, or just anything that are backed by law, I'm always very critical, and I have my own biased opinion, right? But just leaning towards tires, saying also, when you look at, and it drew a very good reference to the EUAI Act. So today, when you look at the EUAI Act, there's, just looking at an example, there's the part that speaks to compute, right? So you have the compute threshold, which uses flops, right? Floating point integer as a good example for you to, effectively govern, right, how AI models, so general purpose AI models, for instance, that are being deployed or released, how well do they ensure that they are in compliance with, that flops threshold? So flops here is like a computing, computing power threshold that is normally used whenever you are training your model. But it's limited because when you look at the current models that have been released so far by most of these labs, all of them have they've surpassed the thresholds, from whether the one released recently by OpenAI, the reasoning model they had for O301, or whichever one, they've surpassed it. So that has serious implication when you look at it. So even before the law goes into full effect, and before the implementation and enforcement, you can already see that there's so much progress that has been made. And then a lot of these companies are already showing non-compliance. So just thinking about, this AI framework for the region, and still leaning towards what I have mentioned, the best approach is still go through like industry guidelines. Just use that as a soft, spot to ensure that you can mostly educate different kind of stakeholders on the limitations and the opportunities, and then where they see themselves playing and the possible approach that might be taken in the future, just to align with that position of whether we are going to have a regional AI framework. The challenge opportunities, right, or sort of hinders innovation. You don't want to be at that spot because that means it's going to set us back. We're already behind. Now imagine having a framework that now sets us back again in multiple folds. So just thinking about it, there must be that balance and just ensuring that things are done, appropriately. So that's how I think about it too.
Yeah.
Just to, I'm not shy, you're speaking, sorry, Loretta. But just to add actually on what has been said, I think from an African perspective, I would say that it would be more important, I think, for us to focus on looking at things also from basic perspective. So for instance, when you look at data protection already, data is like the backbone of AI, right? But we already don't even have adequate cross-border transfer rules, right? So implementation is a problem, differences in data protection authorities, functions, and whatnot. So I think it's good to focus on what our issues are at the moment. And I would say in that sense, it's good that we have the continental strategy because at least we can start the implementation of the strategy with a view to reach a point of actually having potential AI regulatory frameworks across the continent. And I think even if you look at other jurisdictions that have already, put in place AI laws such as the EU, there are already a lot of tensions that we're actually witnessing between innovation and regulation. So, for instance, I saw that there was the AI code of conduct, which are voluntary code of conduct, but already certain companies such as Meta are rejecting it, So there's already a lot of tensions that are ongoing between regulation coming on too strong, whether it's, even if it's soft law in the sense of what we know. So I would say that it would be better for us to perhaps look at how we can assess our maturity as a continent when it comes to AI use, AI development, look at our existing regulations when it comes to data protection and cross-border transfer of data, and also consider, upskilling our youth or our talent on the continent and looking at how we can also put in place infrastructure. So perhaps data centers which can be used across the region or across countries, they still need to have very robust data protection and cross-border data transfer rules in place. So I think I would say it's good to take it easy for now.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing is no need for hard rules right now. Let's focus on some of the immediate problems we need to solve for first in Africa so that we don't stifle innovation or draw ourselves back. Lovely, very lovely answers to that question. Okay, so there's another question here now. It says, for the big tech companies in Africa, the Microsoft, Meta, IBM, are there any regulations to moderate their use and implementation of AI in African states, given that not all countries on the continent are developed in terms of AI regulatory frameworks? Are there any existing regulations that can moderate how some of these big tech companies deploy AI in Africa? I think that's really what the question is trying to ask.
I can quickly speak to that. I think it ties to the previous point on the current state of AI legislation on the continent, right? The truth is that there are very few countries, if at all, that have clear AI laws. I mean, there are strategies, there are white papers, there are policies and roadmaps and whatnot, but there are no hard laws yet. In the absence of law, there is no crime. That's how it works. So, and that's something that a lot of we've seen reports here and there of data misuse, especially when it comes to African data subjects, right? Serious data collection, data mining, data scraping across the continent. So when it comes to AI regulation specifically, maybe not so much at the moment, but I know that supervisory authorities or regulators are pursuing these big organizations using other domains like consumer protection, like data protection. In Nigeria, for example, we had recent fines, very huge, humongous fines from the EFs. What are they called? The consumer protection body. I've forgotten. Exactly. Exactly. So we saw fines on the basis of the NITSDA and the NDPA. That's from a data protection, and these are concurrent fines, very significant and almost equivalent to what we see in the EU. So I see regulators pursuing these big companies on the basis of other domains, but not so much on the AI front. And again, this mirrors what obtains in the EU. Currently there is no AI fine that I'm aware of. I mean, there are investigations, there are negotiations on how to comply with existing laws. But laws on the basis of the EU AI Act, for example, we're not seeing them yet again because it's not operational. But I want to say something very quickly in the sense that the operationalization of AI laws globally, and not just the African continent, it won't come from regulations. It won't come from guidelines. It will come from the courts. That's something that I'm very optimistic about. And I say this in relation to a case that I'm closely involved in. That's the Mobley versus Workday case going on in the US right now. I do privacy and AI in the HR context. And this is a case that will revolutionize that landscape. So it's how we use AI for recruitment and who has responsibility, whether it's the AI vendor or the employer. It's ongoing right now. A couple of novel issues are coming up. But I also see similar judicial interference, similar judicial interpretation on other domains, other topics in AI. So I'm not only looking at laws, written laws, on the African continent or the global landscape. I'm also looking at the actions of the courts in the future. That's something to be optimistic about. That's something that I'm optimistic about.
I'm just going to add something short. I think I would go back to the statement that I made that perhaps we may not have AI specific laws, but we already have a lot of laws that protect us in so many different ways. So for instance, there was a case brought against Meta in Kenya. I think I forgot the specific details, but it was on employees. And so the Employment Act applies there. The Constitution of Kenya also applies when it comes to human rights violations. So I think that there are already a lot of laws that exist when it comes to how AI is used on the continent or how AI is developed on the continent, what type of data is going to be used. And so I think we already have certain ways to protect within the continent by using the existing laws. Now, looking at the specific AI laws, perhaps we may not have that, but obviously, I think with time, we're going to be able to specifically be able to protect ourselves when it comes to that. Yeah.
Just tying back to what Tayo and Ikran have already said. So taking it, for example, to the Nigeria Data Protection Act, right? If you're thinking about AI, you know that you're already thinking about data because data is the backbone of AI. And the NDPA, for example, has sections around like privacy by design. And so they can actually hold companies responsible on that. They can hold companies responsible on data minimization, decision making, which is actually part of AI, right? So like everyone has said, no specific thing yet, but we can always tie it back to data protection laws, which are currently ongoing. So yeah.
Wow. This has been such an insightful Q&A session. I think I've even learned so much more from this audience Q&A. Thank you so much to everyone that has been listening and engaging. I think someone is speaking. Sorry. Is Tayo trying to speak?
No.
Okay. All right. So we just have one more question from the audience. Someone is asking, which PECB standard would you recommend for an AI startup that has 5 to 15 employees? So this is the last question we'll be taking, and then we'll just call it a day. We just have 4 more minutes, so I don't know who would like to respond to that, and then we can wrap up quickly. I can take the question again. It's, what PECB standard would you recommend for an AI startup that has 5 to 15 employees? And I mean, if this isn't even a question we can take now, we can always come back to that. Maybe respond via email. UB has unmuted. All right.
Yeah, no, so I just think maybe you should look to ISO standards. They're quite clear. So for example, ISO IEC 4200, so the one on AI management systems. So maybe look to that, look to your NIST framework. That would help. And then look to specifically if you're looking around things that can help you with impact assessment, maybe look at companies that already have AI models as part of their stuff. And so no, even if you cannot buy their models, they have like free impact assessment questionnaires, for example, going around. So if you check, for example, Trust Arc, you could take, their own AI impact assessment and then amend it to fit your own particular use case. Always amend it actually to fit your use case, because it might not directly apply to you. So just change it to fit you. And even when you're relying on ISO and NISC, I would always say look to it, but amend it to fit what you're developing, what you're using, and what your particular context is.
So just quick addition to that, the PCB, I think, is a certification body, right? That, they kind of train or issue certifications of different standards, and the ISO standards are one of them. Indeed, I will always recommend ISO standard. I am a certified auditor for a couple of standards and implement as well. The ISO 42001, beautiful standard, came out like 2-3 years ago, but it's been recently updated. It's the artificial intelligence management standard, right? But for an organization of 5 to 15, I would absolutely not recommend it for a lot of reasons. Number one, it's not a cheap certification. It's not cheap because there are so many, the mandatory clauses, the controls as well, the optional controls that you have to implement. There are so many organizational, technical, and physical measures that you have to implement. And also, before you implement something like ISO 2001 anyway, you need to implement foundational management systems like security, like privacy, 27701, like business continuity, and that. So that would be an addition. It's so comprehensive, but the one thing that you can always do is to draw lessons from. You can read the standards and try to apply, but to onboard completely, to get certified, it's something that big organizations usually do. If you're an organization of 5 to 15, I wouldn't exactly recommend getting certified, but you can always learn lessons. And again, you're floating. There are resources from different supervisory authorities that are coming out. You look at Gartner. Gartner is a nice, governance organization, governance for different frameworks. There are always resources that you can look up, read, try to apply recommendations that they have. The ICO is always coming up with, that's the supervisory authority for the UK, the data protection authority for the UK, by the way. They're always coming up with resources to help, not just with privacy, but also AI governance. CNIL in France, one of the strongest regulators in the world, always coming up with nice resources that can help. So for organizations, small organizations, in fact, there are measures now in the EU to reduce compliance liabilities for small organizations. I mean, if I have 5 to 10 employees, you cannot subject me to the same compliance conditions as an organization like Google. It doesn't make any sense, right? So there is reduced liability for small organizations. As much as you can, always start with the foundational principles of AI governance, like the robustness of your whatever AI system that you're building. Because again, small organizations don't build AI systems or foundation models per se. What they do is they build AI systems on foundation models. They integrate foundation models to build AI systems. They train specific data sets for specific context. So it's not the same. I'm not OpenAI. I'm not Anthropic, right? So my system, my use case is very limited. You cannot subject me to everything. So as much as possible, if you're still small, you should be looking towards smaller, not just smaller, but more advisory focused frameworks that you can draw from. But to certify or to try to go the full length, I think you spend more money on compliance than the money that you're spending on your actual business. So I wouldn't be, it takes some discretion too, in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Wow. This has been such an interesting conversation. Such an interesting conversation. I have learned so much. This is 1:31 already. And we've been able to attend to all the questions from the audience. So I'll just start wrapping things up so as not to take any more of our time. Oh, I think I see Victor has unmuted. Would you also like to add?
I mean, it's most of what has been said has been captured well. So yeah.
Okay. Okay, I don't know if Tayo is speaking, because I think
I am not.
see.
I'll just mute myself.
Okay. Thank you all so much. I would like to thank all the expert speakers on this panel for making out the time to have this conversation with us, to share insights, to shed light on some of these concepts that seem so big up there, and just simplifying it for us, making it easy to understand. And I think the interesting part for me was also looking at it from an African perspective. How should we be thinking about AI governance in Africa? How should we be, what should we consider as we start to adopt some of the existing frameworks? This has been, in fact, 10 over 10, a 10 over 10 session. Thank you all so much. And a big thank you to everyone that joined, who has been listening, that joined on time, joined early. So we want to keep to time. We know that you have other engagements for the day. Thank you so much, UB. Thank you, Tayo. Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Ikran, for honoring the invitation to speak today. And just to also say that we host the Hive Pulse Point every month. So watch out for August edition. What we just try to do, like I said at the beginning, is to look at some contemporary topics and issues and bring experts to come and break it down for us. So thank you all for joining. Thank you for listening. Thank you to the speakers. I don't know if you have any final words on what today's topic is. We can just take final words and then we call it a day. If anyone has any final words.
I have a couple. I'll try to make it very, very simple and short, right? So I would say the lessons that we've learned so far when it comes to AI governance, from an organizational perspective, maybe EB can share something from an academic perspective, right? But from an organizational perspective, I think we've learned some very key lessons. And number one would be that data quality is paramount, right? The quality of the data that you're collecting, and this is for organizations that are building AI systems, by the way. The quality of the data that you're training your model with is extremely important. If you use bad data, you get bad outputs. If you use contaminated data, you get contaminated outputs. So data quality, fundamental. Security and privacy are also essential, right? The existing rules, the traditional rules of privacy and security are still very essential. And that's why domains or regulatory frameworks for privacy, for security, for business continuity, for quality are still very relevant when it comes to AI governance. So those traditional norms and rules remain. Human oversight, indispensable, because again, there are projections that before we get maybe to comfortable levels of assurance with AI outputs, we still need another 2 to 3 years. So in that interval or in the interim, we still need human oversight as much as possible, human in the loop. Risk assessment, very continuous, right? Algorithmic audits, which is periodic, as distinct from monitoring, which is real time. Those things are very important. You need to keep tracking, keep monitoring the performance of your AI system. What goes in, what comes out. Accountability, we've discussed this a few times, right? Clear ownership, everyone must know who owns what, right? And you need to know who to approach when something goes wrong. And final note that lead, that governance lead has to be there. So someone that you can look to for direction. And the final note, collaboration between all AI stakeholders. Everyone is a stakeholder, right? As people are aware, staff and employees are aware of privacy in the organization, they should also be aware of the implications of AI use in the organization. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Okay, I'll add to what Tayo said because he mentioned my name, right? So basically, I think the first thing is to learn not to put anything in silos, right? It won't work. Just ensure that everything is cross-functional. Number two, I don't think you need to reinvent the wheel. I actually think you need to develop on top of the wheel. So you don't have to go out really looking for anything new. Just dig in and expand. The third thing for me would be to ensure that you keep your policies very agile, very alive, very flexible. And the way to do that is to ensure that you have reviews from time to time. So maybe like monthly check-ins with your committee or whatever you're calling it, pod, whatever you're calling it, and continually updated, right, to reflect your use cases so that it doesn't become stale or, and be flexible as it has to do with regulatory alignment. And I think the last thing I want to say is that, we talked about the ISO and NIC and all of that. And yes, of course, if you cannot onboard because you don't have the funds for that, right? You can just read it up and do stuff, use free resources. there's a lot of free things, like the amount of free things that are going around. If you actually do that, you're doing great work. If you can actually adhere to it, like even if you don't onboard in full, but you can rate it and you can kind of like develop your product or bring your company, your organization, towards what it's talking about, I think you'd still be doing fine. And lastly, I want to say thank you, Tech High, for inviting me. This was really great and it was lovely to meet everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Ubi.
Okay, go ahead, please, Loretta.
No, go ahead, Victor. No, I was just thanking Ubi.
All right. Yes, I think for me, my own final words would be, for every organization, you need to have a clearly defined problem that you're trying to solve for. You need to be able to understand what this AI system is that you're trying to build or maybe procure, what is going to accomplish and do. So there must be a very clear outcome that you intend to accomplish, and not just basically leaving things as as they should just be. Secondly, is you need to have a clear process. I think a lot of times it's just for and what others have said. When you have something in existence, you can layer on it to just improve, on what needs to be done from an AI governance perspective. So you need a clear process. Thirdly, is you need to be able to identify your stakeholders properly within the AI governance landscape, especially when you're within an organization that utilizes AI, at a very large scale. You need to understand those stakeholders, those that are within the organization, and possible customers of those that would interact externally with that AI. And I would also say that as much as possible, there's a need for upskilling when it comes to AI. There's need for serious literacy, because a lot of times the way AI continues to progress, there's this, you might not be able to even keep up at some point. And it's very important that there's that constant upskilling. You need to be able to be aware and follow the trends, and then continue to build, capacity internally within the team, just to ensure that you are at the right spot. So for me, again, it's been an absolute pleasure doing this. And thank you everyone for your contribution also. It's been really helpful personally. And I look forward to connecting. All right.
Thank you. Okay, so just like from Ikran now, if you can give us your final word, because we have really
Thank you so much. I would say that just to build on what everybody has said, to look from my perspective, I think the main thing is to be aware of the laws which already apply to you and which cross-cut with AI governance and AI governance frameworks. So for instance, when you look at data protection, the data that you're inputting into the AI systems, are they permitted data sets? Do you have the rights to actually share this data? And even when you look at the outputs coming out of the system, is it, are you considering it from an intellectual property perspective? Are you looking at the potential of copyright violations? Who has the ownership of the output, for instance, if this is a system that you have licensed, So to keep in mind all these existing laws. And then talking about risk assessment framework, I think that especially for organizations that don't have the capacity to pay for or have the resources to bear certain costs for international certifications, to be aware of existing risk assessment frameworks. And at the end of the day, I think even if there are AI governance tools out there, you still always have to tailor it to your current context and to your local context. So to be able to utilize and take advantage to leverage the existing risk assessment frameworks. And as an organization, to also focus on strengthening your own data governance and just being aware of your rights and responsibilities vis-a-vis the other stakeholders in your space or ecosystem. And finally, I would say that, of course, as you look at all these legal strategies to go back to what is, the mission of your company, or what are your main goals when it comes to AI, and to be able to balance these commercial priorities with your legal strategies. And I think that's all from my end.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so we'll call it a wrap. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all. Yes.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you, everyone.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Hi, everyone.